Marcus Thompson had lived alone on his 200-acre farm in rural Nebraska for nearly 15 years. At 42, he'd grown accustomed to the silence that stretched across the cornfields, broken only by the occasional lowing of cattle or the distant rumble of his old pickup truck. His wife Sarah had died in a car accident when he was 27, and since then, he'd poured himself into the land, finding solace in the predictable rhythms of planting and harvest, sunrise and sunset. The October morning started like any other. Marcus rolled out of bed at 5 a.m., pulled on his worn jeans and flannel shirt, and headed to the barn to check on his livestock. The air carried the crisp bite of autumn, and frost sparkled on the fence posts like scattered diamonds. He'd been dealing with a sick calf for the past week, and Dr. Peterson, the local veterinarian, had warned him to keep a close eye on the animal. As he approached the barn, Marcus noticed something unusual. The heavy wooden door, which he always secured with a thick chain and padlock, hung slightly ajar. His first thought was that one of the neighbor kids might have been playing pranks again, but as he drew closer, he heard something that made his blood run cold, soft whimpering, barely audible above the gentle shuffling of the animals inside. Marcus pushed the door open slowly, his heart hammering against his ribs. The morning light filtered through the gaps in the wooden slats, casting long shadows across the hay-strewn floor. His Jersey cow, Bessie, stood near her stall, unusually alert, her large brown eyes fixed on something in the far corner. Following her gaze, Marcus saw a sight that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Curled up in a pile of fresh hay, barely visible beneath a tattered blanket that looked like it had been pulled from a garbage bin, was a young woman. She couldn't have been more than 25, with long auburn hair matted with dirt and what looked like dried tears. Her face was a patchwork of bruises, a black eye that had swollen shut, split lips, and fingerprint-shaped marks around her throat. Her left arm was cradled protectively against her chest, and Marcus could see that her wrist was bent at an unnatural angle. The woman's breathing was shallow and labored, and she shivered despite the relatively warm temperature in the barn. Her clothes, a thin summer dress that had once been white but was now stained with mud and blood, offered little protection against the elements. Her feet were bare and cut, suggesting she'd walked a considerable distance across rough terrain. Marcus stood frozen for a moment, his mind racing. He'd heard stories on the news about domestic violence, about women fleeing abusive situations, but he'd never encountered it firsthand. His immediate instinct was to call the police, but something about the woman's condition, the way she'd sought shelter among his animals, the desperate vulnerability in her battered face, made him hesitate. "Ma'am," he called softly, not wanting to startle her. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" The woman's good eye fluttered open, and Marcus saw terror flash across her features. She tried to scramble backward, wincing as the movement jarred her injured arm, but there was nowhere to go. She was trapped in the corner, surrounded by hay bales and the curious gazes of Marcus's animals. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible and thick with pain. "Please don't. I'll leave. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to trespass. I just needed somewhere to rest." Marcus raised his hand slowly, the way he would approach a spooked horse. "It's okay," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "I'm not going to hurt you. My name is Marcus Thompson, and this is my farm. You're safe here." The woman studied his face with her one good eye, as if trying to determine whether he was telling the truth. After a long moment, some of the tension left her shoulders, though she remained pressed against the hay bales. "I'm Emma," she said finally. "Emma Rodriguez. I don't know where I am." Marcus knelt down slowly, maintaining a respectful distance. "You're about 20 miles outside of Hallbrook, Nebraska. How did you get here?" Emma's face crumpled and fresh tears began to roll down her cheeks. "I walked," she said. "I walked all night. I couldn't stay there anymore. He was going to kill me." The raw pain in her voice hit Marcus like a physical blow. He'd heard that same desperation once before, in his own voice, on the night he'd received the call about Sarah's accident. It was the sound of someone whose world had completely fallen apart. "Who was going to kill you?" Marcus asked gently. "My husband," Emma replied, the words coming out in a rush now as if a dam had burst. "Derek, he's a police officer in Millfield. He's been hurting me for 2 years now, but last night was different. He had his gun and he said he was tired of my crying, tired of my face. He said he was going to end it, make it look like an accident." Marcus felt his jaw clench. He'd never been a violent man, but the thought of someone terrorizing this broken woman made his hands curl into fists. "How did you get away?" "He passed out drunk," Emma said, touching her swollen eye gingerly. "He gave me this before he started drinking. I waited until I was sure he was unconscious, then I took some clothes and ran. But I couldn't go to the police station, they all know him there. They think he's this great guy, this hero. And I couldn't go to my family. He told them I was crazy, that I hurt myself for attention. No one would believe me." Marcus studied Emma's injuries with a growing sense of rage. The bruises on her throat were clearly from hands, the split lip was fresh, and the way she held her arm suggested a fracture. This wasn't self-inflicted, this was systematic abuse. "We need to get you to a hospital," Marcus said. "Your arm looks broken and you might have a concussion." Emma shook her head frantically. "No, please. He knows people at the hospital. If they call it in, he'll find me. He'll say I'm delusional, that I ran away and hurt myself. He's done it before. Please, I just need to rest for a few hours, then I'll move on." Marcus realized he was facing a dilemma. Every instinct told him to get Emma medical attention immediately, but he also recognized the truth in her words. Small-town networks were tight, And if her husband was a police officer with connections, she could very well end up back in his hands before anyone realized what was happening. "Okay," he said finally, "but we're going to take care of those injuries here. I've got first aid supplies in the house, and I know enough about broken bones from dealing with livestock accidents." Emma looked at him with something approaching hope. "You do that for a stranger?" Marcus smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face. "You're not a stranger anymore, Emma. You're someone who needs help, and I've got help to give." Over the next hour, Marcus carefully helped Emma to the farmhouse, supporting her weight as she limped across the yard. Inside, he set her up in his guest bedroom, Sarah's old sewing room that he'd converted after her death, and began the delicate process of assessing her injuries. Emma's wrist was indeed broken, and Marcus fashioned a makeshift splint from wooden slats and medical tape. He cleaned the cuts on her feet with antiseptic, bandaged the deeper wounds, and gave her ice packs for the swelling around her eye. Throughout the process, Emma remained mostly silent, but Marcus could see her gradually beginning to relax as she realized he truly meant her no harm. "When did you last eat?" Marcus asked as he finished wrapping her wrist. Emma had to think about it. "Yesterday morning, I think. Derek doesn't like me to eat much. He says it makes me lazy." Marcus felt that familiar surge of anger, but he kept his voice steady. "Well, that's going to change. I'll make you something light. Your stomach might not handle much after everything you've been through." As he prepared scrambled eggs and toast in the kitchen, Marcus found himself thinking about his options. Emma couldn't stay hidden forever, and eventually, her husband would start looking for her. But she was right about the local authorities. If Derek Rodriguez was well connected, involving them could be disastrous. When he returned to the bedroom with the food, Emma was sitting up against the pillows, looking around the room with curious eyes. She'd noticed the quilting supplies still stored in the closet, the delicate lace curtains, the feminine touches that Marcus had never quite been able to remove. "Your wife?" she asked quietly. Marcus nodded. "Sarah, she died 15 years ago." "I'm sorry," Emma said. "She had good taste. This room feels peaceful." They ate in companionable silence, and Marcus was relieved to see Emma manage to finish most of the food. Color was beginning to return to her cheeks, and the wild, hunted look in her eyes was starting to fade. "Marcus," Emma said finally, setting down her fork, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth." "Of course." "Why are you helping me? You don't know me. For all you know, I could be lying about everything. I could be dangerous." Marcus considered the question seriously. "Because 15 years ago, I was in the worst pain of my life, and strangers helped me. Sarah's funeral director gave me extra time to say goodbye without charging me. The neighbor brought me meals for 2 months. Dr. Peterson came out here every week to check on me, even though I wasn't sick. People helped me when I couldn't help myself." He paused, looking out the window at the fields where he'd learned to live again. "And because I know what it looks like when someone's telling the truth about pain. You've got that look, the same one I saw in the mirror for about 5 years after Sarah died." Emma's eyes filled with tears again, but this time they weren't tears of fear or desperation. They were tears of relief, of gratitude, of something that might have been hope. "There's something else," Marcus continued. "I've been thinking about your situation, and I might have an idea. It's unconventional and you don't have to agree to it, but it might solve some of your immediate problems." Emma looked at him expectantly. In Nebraska, there's still a law on the books that allows for emergency marriages under extreme circumstances. It's old-fashioned and it's rarely used, but it's legal. If we were married, you'd have immediate legal protection as my wife. Derek couldn't touch you without going through me first, and he'd have to prove abuse rather than you having to prove innocence. Emma stared at him in shock. "You're suggesting we get married, but we just met. You don't know anything about me." "I know enough," Marcus said simply. "I know you're brave enough to walk 20 miles through the night to escape someone who was going to kill you. I know you're honest enough to worry about whether you're putting me in danger. And I know you're strong enough to keep fighting when most people would have given up." Emma was quiet for a long time, processing the proposal. Finally, she spoke. "What would you get out of it? This would be a huge risk for you." Marcus smiled. "Maybe I'm tired of eating dinner alone. Maybe I'm tired of talking to the cows because they're the only ones who listen. Maybe I think Sarah would have liked you, and she would have expected me to do the right thing." Emma studied his face, searching for any sign of deception or hidden motives. What she saw was sincerity, kindness, and a deep well of loneliness that matched her own. "If we did this," she said slowly, "it would be a marriage of convenience, a business arrangement to keep me safe. I wouldn't expect. I couldn't." "I understand," Marcus said gently. "We'd be partners, not lovers. Friends helping each other out of difficult situations. You'd have your own space, your own life. The only thing that would change is that you'd have legal protection and a place to heal." Emma closed her eyes, weighing her options. She could try to disappear entirely, but where would she go? She had no money, no identification. Derek had taken her ID and credit cards months ago as part of his control tactics. She could try to make it to a women's shelter in a bigger city, but that would mean more walking, more risk of being caught. Or she could trust this kind stranger who'd found her broken in his barn and offered her not just shelter, but protection. When she opened her eyes, Marcus was still watching her patiently. No pressure in his expression, just quiet support for whatever decision she made. "Okay," Emma said, her voice stronger than it had been since he'd found her. "Let's do it. Let's get married." Marcus felt a flutter of something he hadn't experienced in years. Not romantic love, that would come later if it came at all, but purpose. For the first time since Sarah's death, he felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be, doing exactly what he was meant to do. "There's one more thing," he said. "Judge Patterson owes me a favor. His prize bull got loose last spring and wandered onto my property. I could have pressed charges for property damage, but instead I helped him round up the animal and repair his fences. He said if I ever needed anything, I should call." Emma managed a small smile, the first Marcus had seen from her. "You think he'd perform an emergency wedding ceremony?" "At dawn, if necessary," Marcus replied. "Patricia Patterson has been trying to marry off every eligible bachelor in the county for 30 years. She'll be thrilled." As the sun set over the Nebraska plains, Marcus made the call that would change both their lives forever. Judge Patterson, despite being roused from his evening television program, was indeed willing to perform the ceremony. He asked few questions, perhaps sensing the urgency in Marcus's voice, and agreed to meet them at the courthouse at 6 a.m. Emma spent her first night at the Thompson farm in the guest bedroom, sleeping more peacefully than she had in months. For the first time in 2 years, she went to bed without checking the locks 3 times, without jumping at every sound, without wondering if she'd wake up to Derek's hands around her throat. Meanwhile, Marcus lay awake in his own room, staring at the ceiling and wondering if he'd lost his mind. In less than 12 hours, he'd gone from being a confirmed bachelor to preparing for his second marriage. But every time doubt crept in, he remembered the terror in Emma's eyes when she'd first awakened in the barn, and he knew he was doing the right thing. As dawn approached, both Marcus and Emma prepared for a wedding unlike any either had ever imagined. A ceremony born not of love, but of necessity, desperation, and the kind of human decency that sometimes appears in the darkest moments of our lives. The first pale light of sunrise was just beginning to creep across the horizon when Marcus knocked softly on Emma's door. She was already awake, had been for hours, sitting by the window and watching the sky slowly lighten. She'd borrowed one of Sarah's dresses, a simple blue cotton sundress that Marcus had suggested when Emma realized she had nothing appropriate to wear. It fit reasonably well, though it was a bit loose in places. "You ready for this?" Marcus asked as Emma opened the door. She looked at him standing there in his best shirt and tie, his usually unruly hair combed neatly, and felt a strange mix of gratitude and terror. As ready as someone can be for marrying a stranger at dawn to escape a murderous husband. Marcus chuckled. "When you put it like that, it does sound pretty crazy." The drive to the courthouse was quiet, both of them lost in their own thoughts. Emma kept glancing in the side mirror, half expecting to see Derek's patrol car bearing down on them. But the roads remained empty except for a few early rising farmers heading out to tend their livestock. Judge Patterson was waiting for them on the courthouse steps, looking remarkably awake for someone who'd been roused before sunrise. His wife Patricia stood beside him, beaming with excitement and holding a small bouquet of flowers she'd apparently picked from her garden. "Marcus Thompson," the judge said, extending his hand. "It's good to see you, son, and this must be Emma." Emma shook his hand, trying not to wince as the movement jarred her injured wrist. "Thank you for doing this, Judge Patterson. I know it's unusual circumstances." Patricia Patterson stepped forward and handed Emma the bouquet, a charming mix of late-blooming roses and baby's breath. "Every bride needs flowers," she said simply. "And don't you worry about the circumstances, dear. Sometimes love comes in the most unexpected ways." Emma felt a pang of guilt at the woman's assumption, but Marcus caught her eye and gave her a reassuring nod. Let them think it was a love story. It was safer that way. The ceremony itself was brief but oddly moving. Standing in the judge's chambers with the morning light streaming through the windows, Emma found herself listening to the words as if they meant something beyond legal protection. When Marcus took her uninjured hand and promised to honor and protect her, there was something in his voice that suggested he meant every word. When it came time for Emma to speak her vows, she looked into Marcus's kind eyes and felt something shift inside her chest. "I promise to be grateful for your kindness," she said, deviating from the traditional words, "and to be worthy of your trust." Judge Patterson pronounced them husband and wife at exactly 6:23 a.m., and Patricia insisted on taking photos with an old Polaroid camera she'd brought along. Emma tried to smile naturally, acutely aware of her bruised face, but the older woman was determined to capture the moment. "These will be lovely to look back on," Patricia said, handing the photos to Emma. "Your children will want to see them someday." Emma's smile faltered at the mention of children. Derek had made it clear that he would never allow her to have children, said they would interfere with her devotion to him. But Marcus squeezed her hand gently. "We should probably get going," he said. "Emma's still recovering from a fall and she needs her rest." The lie came so smoothly that Emma almost believed it herself. Marcus had clearly thought through their cover story, and she felt another wave of gratitude for his careful consideration of her situation. As they drove back to the farm, Emma stared at the simple gold band Marcus had placed on her finger. He'd apologized for not having something nicer, explaining that it had been his grandmother's wedding ring, kept in a drawer for decades. It fit perfectly, as if it had been meant for her hand. "So," Marcus said, breaking the comfortable silence, "how does it feel to be Mrs. Thompson?" Emma tested the name in her mind. Emma Thompson. It felt strange but not unwelcome. Different, she said finally. Safer. When they arrived back at the farm, Marcus helped Emma out of the truck, and they stood for a moment looking at the house that was now legally her home. The morning sun was fully up now, painting the white farmhouse and red barn in warm golden light. It looked like something from a painting, peaceful and timeless. Emma, Marcus said, his voice serious, I want you to know that this is your home now truly. Not just until you get back on your feet, not just until the danger passes. This is your home for as long as you want it to be. Emma felt tears prick her eyes, happy tears this time. Thank you, she whispered. I don't know how I'll ever repay you for this. You don't need to repay me, Marcus replied. We're family now. Family takes care of each other. As they walked toward the house together, Emma realized that for the first time in years, she was looking forward to the future instead of dreading it. She had no idea what lay ahead, but she knew she wouldn't face it alone. The morning that had started with her broken and frightened in a barn had somehow led to her standing in the sunshine as a married woman, protected by law and by the genuine kindness of a man who'd asked for nothing in return. It wasn't the fairy tale ending she'd dreamed of as a little girl, but it was something better. It was real, and it was safe, and it was hers. 3 weeks into their unconventional marriage, Emma and Marcus had settled into a surprisingly comfortable routine. Emma's physical injuries were healing well. Her wrist was mending properly in its cast. The bruises had faded to yellow-green shadows, and she was sleeping through the night without nightmares. More importantly, she was beginning to remember who she'd been before Derek had systematically stripped away her confidence and identity. Marcus had been the perfect gentleman, never pushing for more than she was ready to give, never making her feel like she owed him anything beyond companionship. They shared meals and conversation, worked together on small farm tasks that didn't require two good hands, and slowly got to know each other as real people rather than desperate strangers. Emma discovered that Marcus was surprisingly well-read, with a collection of classic literature that rivaled any library. He was also an excellent cook, a skill he'd developed out of necessity after Sarah's death. In return, Emma shared stories of her life before Derek, her work as a graphic designer, her love of photography, her dream of traveling to Ireland to see the countryside her grandmother had described in letters. It was a Tuesday morning when their peaceful existence was shattered. Emma was in the kitchen, attempting to make pancakes one-handed while Marcus was out checking the fence line in the south pasture. She heard the sound of a car engine coming up the long gravel driveway and felt her blood turn to ice. Through the kitchen window, she saw a black and white patrol car pulling up to the house. Behind the wheel, she could make out Derek's familiar profile, the square jaw, the mirror sunglasses, the rigid posture that had once made her feel protected but now filled her with terror. Emma's first instinct was to run, but there was nowhere to go. The back door led to open fields where she'd be easily visible, and Derek would expect her to try to escape that way. Instead, she forced herself to think rationally. She was no longer Emma Rodriguez, the frightened woman who'd fled in the night. She was Emma Thompson now, with legal protections and a husband who'd promised to keep her safe. Still, her hands shook as she watched Derek get out of the patrol car and stride toward the front door with the confident swagger she remembered all too well. He was in full uniform, his service weapon visible on his hip, and she knew he was counting on his authority to intimidate whoever might try to interfere. The knock, when it came, was aggressive, the kind of pounding that demanded immediate compliance. Emma took a deep breath, smoothed down her hair, and walked to the door. She could do this. She had to do this. When she opened the door, Derek's eyes widened in shock behind his sunglasses. Clearly, he hadn't expected to find her looking healthy and well-dressed, standing confidently in a doorway instead of cowering in whatever hole he'd imagined her hiding in. "Well, well," Derek said, removing his sunglasses to reveal the cold blue eyes that had once charmed her and later terrorized her. "If it isn't my runaway wife, did you really think you could hide from me forever, Emma?" "I'm not hiding," Emma replied, proud of how steady her voice sounded. "And I'm not your wife anymore." Derek's face darkened. What the hell is that supposed to mean? Emma held up her left hand, showing him the gold band on her ring finger. "It means I'm married to someone else now. Someone who doesn't use me as a punching bag." For a moment, Derek looked genuinely stunned. Then his expression shifted to the rage she knew so well, and she instinctively took a step back. But instead of following her into the house as he would have done in the past, Derek stopped at the threshold. He was still a police officer, still bound by certain rules, and entering someone else's home without permission could cost him his badge. "You can't be married to someone else," Derek said, his voice low and dangerous. "You're my wife. We never got divorced." "Check the records," Emma said, gaining confidence. "I'm legally married to Marcus Thompson as of 3 weeks ago. Judge Patterson performed the ceremony." Derek's jaw clenched. "You little bitch. Do you have any idea what you've done? Do you know how this makes me look? My own wife runs off and marries some farmer like a common whore." Emma felt the old fear trying to rise up, but she pushed it down. "What I've done is escape from an abusive marriage and find someone who treats me like a human being. What you've done is commit multiple felonies, including domestic violence, kidnapping by restraint, and theft of personal property." "Theft?" Derek laughed harshly. "What could I possibly have stolen from you?" "My identification, my credit cards, my bank account access. You took everything so I couldn't leave. That's theft, Derek, and it's also evidence of premeditated abuse. Derek's hand moved toward his service weapon, and Emma's heart stopped. But before he could draw it, another voice cut through the tension. "Is there a problem here, officer?" Marcus had returned from the fence line and was walking across the yard with deceptive casualness. But Emma could see the steel in his eyes, the protective tension in his shoulders. In his hands, he carried a shotgun not pointed at Derek, but clearly visible. Derek's head snapped around to assess this new threat. Marcus was bigger than he was, broader through the shoulders and taller by several inches. More importantly, he was on his own property, legally armed and clearly prepared to defend his wife. "You must be the husband," Derek said, his voice dripping with contempt. "Do you know what kind of woman you married, Farmer? Do you know she's a liar and a cheat?" Marcus stopped about 10 feet away, close enough to intervene if necessary, but far enough to avoid immediate confrontation. "I know she's brave enough to escape from a man who was going to kill her. I know she's honest enough to tell me the truth about her past. And I know she's my wife now, which means she's under my protection." "Your protection," Derek sneered. "I'm a police officer. I have authority here." "Not on my property, you don't," Marcus replied calmly. "And not over my wife. You have no jurisdiction here, Officer Rodriguez. In fact, I'd say you're trespassing." Derek's face was turning red with rage. "She's my wife. She belongs to me." "Actually," Emma said, finding her voice again, "I belong to myself. But I chose to marry Marcus, and that makes me his wife under Nebraska law. You have no legal claim to me anymore." Derek turned back to Emma, and she saw something in his eyes that chilled her to the bone. It was the look he'd had that final night, when he'd held his gun and talked about ending it all. He was past reason now, past caring about consequences. "You think a piece of paper is going to protect you," Derek said, his hand moving to his weapon again. "You think this farmer is going to keep you safe from me. I'll kill him first, then take you home where you belong." That was the moment Marcus had been waiting for. The moment Derek had made a clear threat of violence against both of them. In Nebraska, that gave Marcus the legal right to defend his home and family. "Officer Rodriguez," Marcus said, his voice still calm but carrying a note of warning, "I'm going to suggest you get back in your patrol car and leave my property. Right now, before this situation escalates beyond your ability to control it." Derek actually laughed. "You think you can threaten me? I'm the law around here, Farmer. I can make your life hell in ways you can't even imagine." "Maybe," Marcus conceded. "But right now, you're an off-duty police officer from another jurisdiction who's trespassing on private property and making threats against the legal residents. You've got no backup, no authority, and no witnesses except the two people you're threatening." Derek's hand tightened on his weapon. I don't need witnesses to deal with a wife-stealing piece of trash like you. Actually, you do need witnesses, said a new voice from behind Derek, because that's exactly the kind of thing that ends careers. Derek spun around to see Sheriff Maria Santos walking up the driveway, her own weapon drawn but held low. Behind her was Deputy Frank Miller, a man Derek recognized from regional law enforcement meetings. "Sheriff Santos," Derek said, trying to regain his composure. "This is a domestic situation. I'm here to retrieve my wife." "Your ex-wife, you mean?" Sheriff Santos replied coolly. "I've already checked the records, Rodriguez. Emma Thompson is legally married to Marcus Thompson. She's not your wife anymore, and she's not your problem anymore." Derek looked around wildly, realizing that the situation had spiraled completely out of his control. "You don't understand. She's unstable. She needs psychiatric help. I was trying to get her treatment." "Funny," Sheriff Santos said, "because the Emma Thompson I see looks perfectly rational to me. It's you I'm worried about, Rodriguez. You're out of your jurisdiction, you're making threats, and you've got your hand on your weapon in a threatening manner." Derek realized his hand was indeed hovering over his gun and slowly moved it away. "I haven't drawn my weapon." "No, but you've threatened to use it against unarmed civilians. That's aggravated assault in Nebraska, regardless of what badge you carry in Kansas." Emma watched this exchange with growing amazement. "How did you know to come here?" she asked Sheriff Santos. The sheriff smiled. "Marcus called me yesterday, told me he was concerned about his new wife's ex-husband showing up and causing trouble. Asked me to keep an eye out for Kansas law enforcement vehicles in the area." Emma turned to stare at Marcus, who looked slightly embarrassed. "You planned for this." "I figured he'd come eventually," Marcus said. "Men like that don't give up easily. I wanted to make sure we had backup when he did." Sheriff Santos holstered her weapon and stepped closer to Derek. "Here's what's going to happen, Rodriguez. You're going to get in your patrol car and drive back to Kansas. You're going to file for divorce from Emma Rodriguez, if you haven't already, and you're going to stay away from Emma Thompson. If you come back to Nebraska, if you contact her in any way, if you so much as drive through this county again, I'll have you arrested for stalking and harassment." "You can't do that," Derek protested. "I'm a police officer." "So am I," Sheriff Santos replied. "And in Nebraska, I outrank you. More importantly, I've got probable cause to believe you've been engaging in domestic violence, which makes you unfit to carry a badge anywhere." Derek looked around desperately but found no support. Marcus stood protectively near Emma, his shotgun still visible. Deputy Miller watched him with professional wariness. And Sheriff Santos had the authority to make good on her threats. "This isn't over," Derek said finally, directing his words at Emma. "You can't hide behind these people forever." She's not hiding, Marcus said quietly. She's home. Derek stared at him for a long moment, then turned and stalked back to his patrol car. As he drove away, Emma felt something break loose inside her chest. A knot of fear and tension she'd carried for so long she'd forgotten what it felt like to breathe without it. "Is it really over?" she asked Sheriff Santos. "For now," the sheriff replied. "But I'd recommend you both be careful for a while. File a restraining order, document any contact he tries to make, and call me immediately if he shows up again." After the sheriff and deputy left, Emma and Marcus stood in their kitchen, both of them still processing what had just happened. Emma realized she was shaking, not with fear but with relief. "You called the sheriff yesterday," she said. "You were prepared for this." Marcus nodded. "I've been thinking about it since the day I found you. I know men like Derek don't just give up. I wanted to make sure we had the law on our side when he came." Emma looked at this man who'd married her to keep her safe, who'd anticipated her ex-husband's moves and prepared for them, who'd stood between her and violence without hesitation. Something was happening in her chest, something she hadn't felt in so long she'd almost forgotten what to call it. "Marcus," she said softly, "thank you for everything, for believing me, for protecting me, for—" She gestured helplessly, unable to find words for the magnitude of what he'd done for her. Marcus stepped closer, his eyes gentle. "Emma, you don't have to thank me. We're partners now. We protect each other." Emma looked up at him, really looked at him, and saw something she'd been too frightened and damaged to notice before. She saw kindness, yes, and strength. But she also saw loneliness, the same deep well of loneliness that lived inside her. She saw a man who'd been alone for 15 years, who'd given up on companionship until a broken woman had literally fallen into his life. "Marcus," she said again, her voice barely above a whisper, "what if this marriage became more than just protection? What if it became real?" Marcus went very still, searching her face. "Are you sure? After everything you've been through, are you sure you're ready for that?" Emma thought about it seriously. She thought about the kindness he'd shown her, the patience, the way he'd never pressured her for anything she wasn't ready to give. She thought about the mornings they shared coffee and conversation, the evenings they spent reading together in the living room, the way he made her laugh with stories about his more stubborn livestock. Most importantly, she thought about how she felt when she was with him, safe, valued like herself again. "I'm sure," she said. "I'm ready to try." Marcus smiled then, the same smile that had transformed his face that first morning in the barn. "Then let's try," he said simply. 6 months later, Emma Thompson stood in the same kitchen where she'd confronted Derek, but everything was different now. The restraining order had held. Derek had been quietly forced to resign from his position after an internal investigation revealed a pattern of domestic violence complaints that had been covered up, and Emma had slowly rebuilt her life from the ground up. She'd started a small graphic design business, working with local farmers and small businesses to create marketing materials. Marcus had converted one of the unused barns into a studio space for her, complete with high-speed internet and professional-grade equipment. Her first major client had been the county's agricultural extension office, and word of her work had spread quickly through the farming community. More importantly, her marriage to Marcus had indeed become real in every sense of the word. It had happened gradually, naturally, built on a foundation of friendship and mutual respect that had grown into genuine love. They'd moved into the master bedroom together just last month, and Emma had finally put away the guest room linens that had been her security blanket for so long.